back to Breaking Stereotypes with your host, Zainab Zaeem-Sattar. And I'm very excited for this show this evening. Not because it's the first show back since we've had a holiday, but also because the person I have tonight is someone who I've recently met and I am in complete awe of. Such a humble person and somebody who has agreed to come on the show despite how busy he is. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Muhsin, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Yesilada, who is a British Muslim comedian and is also studying psychology with another subject, but I'm going to let Muhsin fill us in with what that is. So before Muhsin gets a chance to speak over me, I would like to just say that if you wish to pose any questions to Muhsin, then please feel free to chat with us on our Facebook on Ramadan FM, where we will be able to see your chats or questions and we'll be able to put them to Muhsin for you. So without further ado, Muhsin, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. So yeah, stand-up comedian. That's always fun. I'm doing a PhD in psychology, but my research in particular focuses on Islamophobic and radical-Islamist disinformation, which is a bit of a mouthful, but what that basically means is we develop ways to help people detect misinformation online. So we basically give people the tools necessary to see it, spot it, and resist it. That's essentially what the research focuses on.
Wow, so you're right when you said it was a bit of a mouthful, hence why I didn't want to start saying it myself just in case I got it wrong. So I have to admit, when I first saw you, and before I actually say the next piece, I first saw Muhsin's show when he came to Leicester at the Y Theatre to do The Muslims Are Coming, and OMG, what a show that was. And yes, it was broken up into segments, but each segment was absolutely hilarious in its own right, and yours was just amazing. And I loved how you had your jokes from your own culture, your own upbringing. You brought your mum into the jokes as well. And as a mother of four, I could sometimes relate to some of the things that you said as well. And I actually went home and I relayed it to my kids. And I'm like, see, I'm not the only mother. Because sometimes I always say, you know, oh, there's cooler mums out there and so on. But I actually never imagined you studying. When you came in the stage in front, I thought, okay, you're a comedian, that's your full-time job, fantastic. And, you know, I wish you all well. And I stayed behind and, you know, you were lovely enough and humble enough to have that conversation with me. And then I researched into you and then I saw that you're studying and I was in complete awe because what you do when you are doing your tours, it's not easy, you know, traveling around the UK, you know, practicing, trying to write all your sets and so on. So in terms of the comedian element and studying element, I wanted to just delve in that a little bit. And the reason why is because comedy, you know, you got your jokes on this side, but then you're studying psychology and they're completely opposite ends of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's like you got your seriousness and then you got your comedians. Can you just tell us exactly how you got into that?
How did I get into that? That's a good question. I've loved stand-up comedy since I was a child. I remember being like 10 years old and my parents very foolishly let me watch Eddie Murphy Delirious and Raw because they wanted to watch it and I was just there, right? So from a young age, I was kind of exposed to stand-up comedy and I loved it. I'd watch people like Paul Chowdhury as well. As a kid, I'm like, what is this art form? How can people say this on stage? And I was just completely taken back by it. And I was always good at impressions when I was a kid. So I'd do impressions of my parents and family members, which is obviously a big part of my stand-up now. So I was always in love with stand-up. And towards the end of my undergrad, started thinking about more of what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought I was just going to give stand-up comedy a try. And eventually I got to it in 2019 and I just bit the bullet and I went for it. And in regards to the PhD stuff, when I was leaving uni, I didn't want to just go into a job for the sake of going into a job. You know, there's a lot of pressure coming out of uni. You don't want to be the last one out of your friends to get employed, you know. you've invested in this university degree and people put pressure on you to, go out and get a job, so it all seems worth it. But I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take a step back. I really find the stuff that I'm studying interesting, and I think there's something here that I want to learn more about, and I'm just gonna give it a go. So I applied for the PhD, and thankfully I got it. And then the two worlds collided. And in terms of them being two very different things, you're absolutely right. And sometimes it can be a little bit exhausting trying to manage those two different mindsets at the same time. But what I found is I've let them become escapes from each other. So when I need an escape from the PhD work, the comedy is a nice release. But sometimes if I need to just step away from the comedy mentally, I can just focus on the work there. And they've kind of complemented themselves quite nicely. And I think if I had any advice, I know you didn't ask for it, but I'll give it anyway.
Yeah.
For anyone who's coming out of university, finds themselves in a similar position, they have lots of interest. I think a good question that I ask myself and I encourage other people to ask themselves is stop asking yourself, what do you want to do? And start asking yourself, who do you want to be? Because if you know who you want to be, what do you do becomes very easy in life to work out. The who do you want to be is a tougher question that you need to deal with.
Do you know what? That's some sound piece of advice there. And what you said as well about the comedy being, it complements your studying, but also at the same time, it can be a release from the other. As a Muslim female motorbiker, so I ride a motorbike, I get where you are coming from. Sometimes you need something else other than what you normally do. And yeah, we pray and, we do our ibadah and, we do our rosas and everything, but sometimes you just need that something else. So for me, it's my motorbiking. And I see for yourself, you've got your comedy, and how fantastic that you can actually turn something that you enjoy into a career. Because they do say that in order to be good at what you do, you have to love what you do. So in order for you to be good at comedy, you've got to love what you do, and it's your passion, and then you're carrying on with it. So in terms of, so you've explained to us how you got into comedy, and I love what your parents did there, where they wanted to watch it, so they allowed you. I've done that a few times as well with my kids. But in terms of, when can I ask, when was the first time you told your parents that you wanted to go into comedy?
I don't think there was ever like a specific conversation. I just started doing it and I just informed them along the way. And they've just seen me gradually get more serious about it. And,
Okay.
parents have their own concerns, right? About, finances,
Oh, yeah.
and all that stuff. And job security is very big for them, and these all, I don't blame my parents for having those concerns because they're parents.
Mm.
Their number one priority is to protect their children regardless of the age, whether I was 1 or 50.
Oh,
Your
yeah.
parents are your parents. So, but they've been nothing but support. They come to shows. They come to
Wow.
shows and they hear the stuff I say about them. My dad, my dad has mixed opinions on it.
Oh, wow.
My mum loves it. My mum pretends like she's like, oh, don't talk about me tonight. But at the same time, she's like, but what are you going to say? you
I
know?
love it. And then you say it's a surprise, Mum.
Yeah. And then she loves it. My mum's an attention seeker, so she loves it.
Yeah.
My dad, he'll just sit there like, my dad is very factual based. So like, it didn't happen like that. It wasn't a cricket bat. It was a rounders bat. Like just like irrelevant details.
Oh, do you know what? It sounds exactly like my husband that does. But I hear you when you say that we'll always be children to our parents, no matter what our age. I mean, I turn 40 tomorrow. So today's the last day. I'm 39 and I turn 40 tomorrow. My husband kept a surprise birthday party on Saturday for me. And my parents came and, oh yeah, I got a lecture. I got a lecture for riding the motorbike. I got a lecture for doing the surprise birthday party in the first place. And I was like, why are you telling me off? I'm not the one that organized it. I didn't even know about it. But, it doesn't matter how old you become, you're always going to be a child in front of your parents. I'm really glad to hear. I think you're probably one of the first guests I've had since I've been doing this show in 2020 that have actually said that the parents immediately were quite supportive. May I ask, and I mean absolutely no disrespect when I say this, but it's to show that we can show the audience and the viewers the different cultures that we do have. What is your heritage?
Hmm. So my parents are from Cyprus, and we're Turkish Cypriots,
Okay.
and they came here right around. They come here. They came. My dad came here in the 80s, and my mum came here when she was a child in the 70s, but maintained her accent for cultural reasons, I think.
Wow.
I don't know why she still has a foreign accent, but she does, right? She's
Love
been here
it.
since she was 5, and she
Huh?
talks like she came here yesterday. It's quite impressive. But
Yeah.
yeah, we're Turkish Cypriots. I was born here. Turkish Cypriot culture is actually very laid back.
Okay.
Um, we're very similar to people from Turkey, obviously, from the language, but we're also very different. I think I always explain it as when people were deciding who was going to go to Cyprus from Turkey, all the cool, laid back people, adventurous people, like, yeah, let's go to the island.
Yeah.
And all the boring people just stayed on the mainland, like, nah, we're not going over there.
Yeah, let's be pragmatic. Let's stay behind.
Yeah. But all the wild people were like, sure, a little island, but it doesn't have as much employment and trade. Yeah, let's
Mm.
go there.
Yeah, we'll just party all the time. Hey, party. Well, it's worked out. I'm impressed with your mother then if she's managed to keep her accent. Because my uncle came over from India when he was about 6, 7, and you can't tell that he was born abroad. In fact, I didn't know for years after that he was actually born abroad. For me, he was just born here in the UK. So your mother's done really, really well. And that just shows that how proud she also is of her background. I know many people want to, shake that off. And the fact that she wants to keep a connection to it, hats off to her, because it wouldn't have been easy for her growing up in the 70s and
No.
maintaining that culture and that heritage and going with the flow with it. So hats off to her with that. So in terms of that, because one of my questions was going to be that, have you had any challenges? I'm still going to ask you that question then. So you've had the support from your parents and you've explained that your background, everyone's quite laid back. But have you faced any challenges, either it being industry or whether it could be either cultural or society, maybe distant family members or anything?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's always going to be people who have opinions on what you do. You know, some people just don't get it. Some people can't get their head around it, especially if they're, quite traditional with how they live their lives. You go to university, you get a job, you have family, and that's that. They can't get their head around why someone would do such a thing like stand up comedy. You have family members like that.
Mm,
But to be honest, I don't place more value in their opinions than I need to. I take it, I'll just listen to it, and I'm like, okay, it's not going to change anything. In terms of industry, sometimes you do get people who can inadvertently say some disrespectful things about the type of comedy you do. For example, sometimes you might hear there's some people who find the idea of talking about your culture and your background heavily as hacky comedy. For whatever
mm,
reason, they seem to believe that. But in my opinion, funny is funny. And people love to hear it. And there's massive comedians out there who built million-dollar careers, multi-million-dollar careers out about talking about their cultures and their backgrounds and their families. So you do have that as well.
absolutely.
Um, in terms of what other clashes did you ask for?
Society, so I guess society, family, industry, or culture.
Cultural clashes. I don't want to misrepresent. I'm cautious of, although we're making light of the funny parts of our background, our culture, and how we were raised. I don't want to misrepresent it at the same time. I'm kind of conscious of that. I don't want to say anything inflammatory for the sake of saying it to make people from other cultures just laugh. I want my jokes to come a place from love.
Mm,
I don't want people to leave saying, "Oh, that guy hates his background." You know,
yeah,
it's meant to be a celebration of who I am and the people around me, rather than me saying, "Oh, it's so weird. We do this and we're rubbish at this," and like there has to be nuance to the jokes.
yeah. Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that point, and the reason why I'm glad you mentioned it is because, as somebody who was in your audience quite recently and have never heard your comedy before, that was the first time, and that's because I go out a lot, but I don't go out to comedy shows and that, and it was my aunties who brought it to my attention. I was like, yeah, come on, let's go. So for me, being in the audience, I have to, and I'm not saying this because you're on my show right now and you're a guest. I'm quite straightforward. I'm a lawyer, so I speak as it is. But your jokes did not come across to me as somebody who was taking the mickey out of their background. You were somebody who was actually, it's relatability. You were mentioning something that actually, as a British Indian growing up in the 80s and 90s in the UK, I could very much relate to. So it wasn't something that I left feeling, oh my God, Muhsin hates his culture and hates his background. In fact, I thought to myself, wow, how much are we so similar in terms of our thinking, our culture, and our upbringing. And I've never come across a Turkish Cypriot before. You are, for me, my first. So for me, knowing that actually we're a bit similar and we're not all that different, that to me warmed my heart, because it kind of honed into that thing that, I think the best way for me to explain it is Mr. Patel on the corner shop. So whenever somebody knows that your background is Indian, immediately, I've had those jokes where, oh, did your father have a corner shop? Oh, is your surname Patel? And those things, it's those stereotypes. And that's the purpose of my show, breaking stereotypes. What is it that we actually are labeled for that's not necessarily always the case? So I don't want you to feel that your jokes are like that, because they're not. I came away with a lot of actual information about your background, and it warmed me. And I went home and I said to my kids, see, I'm not the only one. So that actually helped me, because it made me say to my children, we're not the only Asian community, we're not the only ones who do this, and there are others as well, so get over it, basically, and I'm not going to change. So it kind of helped me, pick on my kids a little bit more. So yeah, there's that. I just want to go back to something that you said. You said that there are always going to be those odd people who will say something. Now, I personally take things very quickly to heart. I'm always on the defensive, and that's because of my upbringing. But you said something that I just wanted to delve into a little bit more. You said that you've never really taken it too much because it doesn't really change much. Can you, if you can, tell us a little bit more about how you came to that kind of approach? What did you do that helped you do that and helped you overcome those kind of opinions?
I think what it is, I failed enough in my life to not worry about it anymore.
Okay.
I think that's what it comes down to is I remember when I was a kid, maybe I was like 6 years old. My parents, we used to be heavily involved in Turkish schools growing up. It's like very important for my mum and dad for us to go to Turkish school and stuff. And we really enjoyed it. And my mum used to sign me up to poetry recital competitions when I was
Okay.
like 6 years old. And the first one I entered, I was way too young for it. All the other kids were 10, 11, and I was like six. And a 10 and 11-year-old when you're 6 years old, that's an adult in your mind, right?
Mm.
And I remember I came up on the stage and my parents were in the front row. I took one look at them, got stage fright, cried, and walked off.
Oh,
And that was my first introduction to like doing things I didn't want to do that were difficult, but doing them anyway.
yeah.
Because the very next year I went back, did it again, and it went fine, right?
Wow.
And that's the life lesson there. You don't give up just because things are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And stand-up comedy is such a humbling endeavor where it's so difficult to do. It takes so much of your mental time where you lose the capacity to absorb other people's negative opinions, because I know that the only opinion that matters about my comedy really and truly is mine and how
Mm.
I feel about it, because I'm the one who has to deal with the consequences of my comedy, and I have to be the one who deals with the consequences of what I do with my life. If I don't do the things I wanted to do in my life, the people, the older uncles and aunties, I'm going to be very frank here, the very older uncles and aunties who tell you to do this and do that with your life, right? By the time you get to your 80s, they're going to be long gone,
Yeah.
right? Unfortunately. And they're not going to be the ones that have to deal with the consequences. So if you
Absolutely.
let people push you into making decisions for your life, and then eventually they pass and you're left to pick up the pieces, then what?
Yeah.
So you can't let those people have that kind of power over you. You just can't.
And no truer
Um,
word said.
and yeah, so it comes from that. And also, I was raised, my parents, someone pointed this out to me the other day, actually, that I didn't even realize this about myself. My parents had a business grow. My parents are retired now. but they had a meat wholesale business. So growing up, I always saw my parents making decisions, making tough decisions, and being leaders essentially in the workplace, having employees and stuff, organizing things. So I think I've kind of, from a young age, developed a mindset to make my own decisions about things
Mm.
and not realize that I don't have to subordinate, and I've realized that I don't have to subordinate myself to people. So I think upbringing comes into it a lot as well. And that's something I didn't necessarily realize until someone pointed it out to me. And I was like, that might be one of the reasons why I'm comfortable to make these decisions.
I guess that's where you and I are a little bit different because, well, my dad was a businessman, but by the time I was born, my dad decided to get rid of his. And I really don't want to say this because it wasn't on the corner, but he did have a grocery shop as an Indian. But it wasn't on the corner. And yes, once upon a time, our surname was Patel, but only because back in the day, when you had to come to the UK, Indians didn't actually have surnames, and you needed a surname to put in your passport. And my dad just went, yeah, whack on Patel, you know, because that was what was common back then. And then as soon as he came to England, he changed it to Zaeem. But that's where my upbringing is definitely different. I grew up with 3 older brothers, my dad, my uncle, my other uncle, his 3 sons, and I was the only girl for a very, very long time. And it was literally, you know, you got to do this, you got to do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And in fact, when they came up on the weekend, my brothers, my husband, he's got some, you know, heart to do this, but he had a corner in the hall where he did motorbike selfie corner. And he actually parked my motorbike there. Now, we're not allowed to talk about my motorbikes to my parents or my brothers because they don't like it. But he parked my motorbike and he bought all of my leather jackets and everything from home so everyone can wear them. And my dad actually wore one of my jackets and got my mum to sit on the bike at the back of him and he took photos. So I turned around and I said to my dad, Dad, does that mean now I can ride my motorbike to Bolton? And he took one look at me and he went, no. Straight up no. He was like, no, you're not doing it. So I can see the difference between, you know, you and I and your upbringing and my upbringing. And honestly, if I was to say to my parents right now that I'm going to drop being a lawyer and go into comedy, I probably think they will never talk to me again because, like you said, for them it's a case of all the worrying about how are you going to get your gig, how are you going to pay, because it's artistry work, isn't it? And it's not guaranteed that there's always going to be a gig around the corner. So that then brings me to another question. So you knew from a very young age that you wanted to go into comedy. And then when you went to university, that's when you decided you were going to pursue. How did you get your first gig? What did you do?
I just signed up to a gig that I wrote comedy in London into Google, and I just signed up to the first open mic that I saw. And then I brought like a ridiculous amount of friends along for the morals.
As you do.
Turned it into a day out, and I was rubbish, so bad. It was. I watched it back actually. It was hilariously bad. Like
I want to see this now.
I can recite you the first bit if you want of what I said.
Go on then.
So it goes. My name's Muhsin Yesilada. I've been an ethnic minority for 23 years now. My first encounter with an Englishman was at UK border control. He was a lovely man, bless him, until he popped my rubber ducky. And I thought, I wrote that and I thought, I'm a genius.
I love that.
I thought, I've smashed this now, you know? and I just went with it, and it was terrible. And then I fell in love with it, and then we carried on.
I love that. My producer's in the background laughing his head off right now.
Oh, really?
I think that was pretty cool. So I don't see why you think it went bad. But then you have to remember, some jokes are lost on people as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that your jokes are bad. It just means they've not been exposed to some of the stuff that we've been exposed to. So there is a huge difference there. I mean, me and my husband, we will sit there and we'll watch a comedy program or an action movie. And you know, you get those movies where it's just dry, sarcastic jokes and stuff. He doesn't get half of them. And we end up pausing the television every single time for me to sit there and explain it to him. But then equally, when we're watching something that he's been brought up with, I won't get it, and he'll have to pause it for me. So sometimes it not necessarily means that your jokes are bad. It just means people are not being exposed to that area. I absolutely love that sentence, and I really wish you'd put that in the gig, that the tour that you did, because that would have just been hilarious for us.
Maybe the next one will bring it back. You never know.
Definitely, I think it's definitely one you should not lose out. So, in terms of doing the comedy, I mean, you've said you've spoken about what you've learned in terms of people's opinions and not letting it get to you because it's not going to change anything. Do you feel that being a comedian and going out there in those challenging times, in those gigs, and having a room full of people who might not necessarily laugh or laugh so much you're wondering what it is that you've said, what has it taught you in terms of as a person? Has it shaped you in any way?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Every aspect of my life. I think the major lesson I've taken away from my time in stand-up is when something doesn't go wrong, you're completely in control with how you feel about it. When something goes wrong, you're in control with how you react to it. You're allowed to feel sorry for yourself for a bit, but what happens after that will determine how the rest of your life goes. Do you crawl up in a ball and hide, or do you take responsibility for what's happened, regardless of whether it's your fault or not, and then you move forward and you make the changes? What I've realized is if you take responsibility, let's say a gig doesn't go well, it's very easy to say, oh, the crowd's rubbish. Or you
Mm.
can say, what can I do in those situations going forward that will help me crack those situations? And that's a healthier attitude to have. So that's definitely been a lesson that I've learned. Um, Working hard, I know it's a cliche, but if you're going to find your feet in comedy, you have to work extremely hard.
I can
Do a lot
imagine.
of gigs. You have to find yourself in the right place in the right time. You have to learn how to network with people to get yourself opportunities. Yeah, learning how to create opportunities for yourself is massive.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you anymore. That brings me really nicely on to my next question. The traveling element with it and the networking. Any clashes with your faith?
The network, the traveling, you miss things.
Mm.
If you like, let's say you have a show around Eid or like a family gathering or something,
Yeah,
you can miss those things, unfortunately. And that's something everyone has to make their own mind about how they deal with that. And that can cause tension. Yeah, absolutely. That's a real issue for a lot of people.
and this
And
is
it's
where the support of the family and friends come into play as well, isn't it? Like, yeah, we can turn around and say that it does clash, but also there must be some form of support there. Otherwise, you wouldn't carry on doing what you're doing. Now, I wanted to focus on the comedy side, which we have actually done. So for those who are tuning in right now, you are listening to Breaking Stereotypes with your host, Zainab Zaeem-Sattar, and we have Muhsin Yesilada, who is a up-and-coming comedian and also studies psychology and does research, which I'm not going to say because I don't want to get it wrong. But actually, I want to touch upon the research element. The reason being is we have the perfect platform right now, and we've got about 10 minutes, we've got about 11 minutes and 40 seconds. And what you said about the research that you do and the tools that are necessary, when you were explaining that, the first thing that came in my head was today's news, right? Our Prime Minister was announced. Now, I was that oblivious to the fact that we were going to have a Prime Minister being announced today because I've just stopped following the news because of everything that's been happening and all the negativity and all the faults that they've been presenting. And it wasn't until I went to the canteen to get myself some lunch that I saw it on the news that we've got the Prime Minister that's been elected or announced today. In terms of the research that you do and the tools necessary, I want to ask, how, first of all, did you get into that type of research? Of all the PhDs that you could have done, why this one?
Good question. So around 2016, I was in the second year of my degree, my undergrad degree. And I remember me and a few friends, we had a US election party because we thought, oh, how funny is it that Donald Trump is running to be the president of the United States? Let's all stay up and watch him lose.
Oh,
We'll have some snacks, we'll invite people over, we'll order some pizzas, and it'll be great. Eventually, we all fell asleep. We woke up in the morning to find out Donald Trump was the president of the
president.
United States. And I remember thinking to myself, how did this happen?
Mm.
So I started looking into the psychology of Trump and why he was an attractive proposition to people, and how disinformation in the right hands can be used to manipulate people to the gain of political and bad actors. And then
Right.
from there, when it was time to pick a PhD topic, I knew it had to be something to do with misinformation and disinformation, because I was so intrigued by the topic due to the current nature of the world and who was the president at the time. And I was like, right, I've looked at this research. I've looked at where most of the research on disinformation is being targeted at the moment. And a lot of it was targeted at political discourse, particularly in the United States, climate change denial, vaccination misinformation. And I thought to myself, what about Islamophobia and Islamist extremism? I'll give you a couple of statistics. I believe it's something along the lines of 44% of surveyed US Americans believe that uh, Muslim Americans do not have aligned values with Western society, or something along those lines. And then another huge percentage of them believe that Muslims pose some sort of threat to the US. And then I was like, all right, well, what do the Muslims actually believe? And then you look at the statistics when Muslims are surveyed, and it's the complete opposite. And a
Wow.
lot of them do feel like they are alienated outside of mainstream society because of the Islamophobia. And then I thought, well, okay, if those two things are co occurring, more Islamophobia means more Islamist extremism. More Islamist extremism means more Islamophobia. So I very quickly realized how those two things reinforce each other. And I was like, well, there is no Islamophobia, there is no Islamist extremism without misinformation or disinformation. So that's why I got into that topic. I was like, I know I want to do something on misinformation, and I know I care about these issues, and I know they are connected somehow. So I took it upon myself to do the PhD to find out how they're connected and what we can do about it.
Wow. Absolutely. Wow. Those stats are quite high. And I mean, I'm not knowledgeable in the topic at all. And I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, I'm knowledgeable. But, you know, seeing what we do see and being a solicitor, I know a little bit about alienation, especially when it comes from people who you would not expect it to come from. And when other people who are sitting there and listening to it and not doing anything about it, it's not just alienation from the person giving it, it's alienation from those who are witnessing it as well. And that can be quite difficult. So, the tools, you said you give the tools necessary. Am I allowed to ask for an example of what kind of tool that you give so that our audience can just quickly pick up a snippet of what kind of misinformation and what they can do?
Sure. So our research in our lab focuses on a psychological idea called inoculation theory. The idea goes, if you regard misinformation as a virus that spreads through society and social media, you can vaccinate against it.
Okay.
That's just like how a vaccine gives people the antibodies to resist a virus, a future attack the virus. We can give people the mental antibodies to resist future attacks of misinformation. So if you teach people how to spot it, they're less likely to fall for it. So what we did is we analyzed a bunch of Islamophobic and radical Islamist extremist videos. And then what we did is we went in and we identified the types of misinformation techniques used in those videos. So are they jumping to conclusions? Are they trying to invoke emotion? Are they trying to polarize people? These are all techniques that people use to spread misinformation and to make it more persuasive. So that's what we found. We found that a lot of these videos invoke emotion, they have lots of hasty generalizations in them, and they're polarizing. So we developed videos that teach people about those misinformation techniques and how to spot them in a video that or also a piece of content online. And we run studies. And what our studies have shown is the participants who received the inoculation, who were taught about how to spot these misinformation techniques, invoking emotion, polarization, and hasty generalizations, they were far less likely to share misinformation, far less likely to perceive it as reliable, far less likely to support the views of the group than participants who didn't receive our inoculation intervention.
Wow.
So that's the idea in essence.
Wow, that's very intense. Just you saying it, it's quite intensive. So you've got two spectrums. You've got your comedy, which in itself is quite intense, and then you got your psychology and your research, which in itself is quite intense and complex. When do you ever relax, Moshin?
All the time, and this is more than the average person, I think, because
Is it?
yeah, genuinely I think this. I think where people sometimes go wrong with how they manage their time is you can if everyone has stress, everyone, whether you're a cleaner in a school or you're the top barrister in the country, everyone has stress, but it's again, it's like, what power do you give your stress over you?
Mm,
Like if I have a deadline coming up and it's on, I don't know, the deadline is on a Tuesday. If I'm prepared, like, okay, I need to do 200 words a day for the next 10 days and I'll have 2,000 words. That's a doable task. But if I leave it all to the last minute, right? And this is advice for anyone who writes for a living or has any kind of intensive work schedule. If I leave it all to the last minute, then I have 2,000 words to do in one day. So it's all about scheduling and not letting your stress have too much power over you. And I know that's easier said than done, but that's how I go about it.
yeah, it's time management. It's prioritizing, isn't it?
Yes,
At the end of the day, and
absolutely.
and I completely hear you, and I completely agree with you. I recently went for a job interview, so I've changed job recently.
Mhm.
And I went for a job interview, and on my CV, it's got all of the volunteering that I do. So I'm not just a lawyer. I volunteer here at Ramadan FM, but I also volunteer for a couple of the unis in Leicester as a mentor, a university in Birmingham, and a couple of other initiatives, Muslim Lawyers Action Group, and so on. And the interviewer said to me, "How do you prioritize? How do you time manage?" And one of the answers I gave was, well, first of all, having 4 children, and that too being a buy one get one free pair of twins, it's
Mhm.
helped me because I have had children when at a very young age. So when 18 was when I had my eldest, and 19 when I had the twins. So that's kind of shaped me who I was in terms of my skill set, time management, prioritizing. But also it's making sure that I've got a calendar of what I do. Yes, on paper it looks like I'm actually doing a lot, but when you look at it over the course of the month, it's all spread out. It's not all at the same time. And I
Yeah.
can never be at two places at once. Nobody can. But there's a way to manage it, and actually reaching out to the people that I volunteer with, they're actually quite helpful as well. So it's a case of reaching out. Now, you gave a little bit of advice now, and you've given a bit of advice previously. We have about 2 minutes on the clock, and there's 2 questions left that I'd like to ask. The first one is advice for those thinking of doing something similar. And when I mean similar, it doesn't have to be, comedy and psychology, but something where, because I've had a lot of females come in, I've not had that many men come in and say how difficult it is and how they've struggled. Do you have any advice for any gender, for somebody who wants to do something similar and is probably thinking twice about it?
It's your life. You're the only one who's going to have to deal with the consequences of not doing it. I saw a saying, it was like, if you think the bill of failing is hefty, just wait for the bill of regret.
Wow.
It's something I messed up that quote, but it's along those lines, right?
Right.
Your life, you're going to have to deal with the consequences of not doing it. And believe me, it's far worse than failing. Enjoy what you do, love what you do. Don't let it ruin you. Don't let what your goals ruin your life. Remember that you still have a family, you still have friends, and you should still go out and experience things. And whether you succeed or fail, it's about the journey. And no amount of success will make you happy, and hopefully no amount of failure will ruin your life either. Just enjoy the memories along the way.
Wow, sound advice, absolutely sound advice. So we have 40 seconds on the clock. Do you have any upcoming gigs that you want to shout out to the audience?
Yes, I do a lot of gigs for Desi Central events, is where you saw me. So if you want to see me or more shows similar that are catered to South Asian or Muslim backgrounds, go to Desi Central events and you can find me and lots of other great shows. or just follow me on Instagram, and I'm always posting shows from all over the country that I'm doing there. That's
Brilliant.
Muhsin Yesilada on Instagram.
Brilliant. So Muhsin's Insta tag is on my page, and this is Breaking Stereotypes with your host